Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Master in Social Work, MSW, Revised. Second year, MSWE 007 International Social Work. Block 2 International Social Work Education. Unit 3 International Social Work Education, Cultural Issues and Dilemmas. 3.0 Objectives. After studying the unit you should be able to understand the concept of culture and its different dimensions. To get to know why cultural issues have become important in social work practice. To know the response of social work professional bodies and schools of social work to the issues of culture. To familiarize themselves with different ways by which cultural sensitivity can be developed among social workers. 3.1 Introduction. The process of globalization has unleashed a number of new forces that has resulted in the emergence of new social problems and simultaneously complicated old ones. Clearly, models of social work presently used are inadequate to meet these challenges. Social workers are searching for innovative methods and strategies to address the emerging situation. Some of the broad areas in which social workers have been thinking and reflecting are on following areas. Social workers have to move away from social work models that emerged in West and are still used in most countries in the world. Social workers need to respond to the global nature of present-day social problems. They have to learn to deal with different stakeholders in different countries having different cultures. Social workers are also moving from one country to another in search of jobs, opportunities and experiences. They are part of the internationally mobile professionals like many other professionals. Most nations have become multicultural in nature and social workers while working even within one's own nation have to deal with members belonging to different cultures. The above-mentioned factors have necessitated that new models of social work education are constructed and applied. It is a long-drawn process given that many of the challenges faced by social workers are rooted in problems caused by diversity and discrimination. The issues of culture and communication, therefore, are important components in any discussion on social work education today. This unit will discuss the issues related to culture and related issues in social work practice and ways to develop cultural competence in social workers. 3.2 Definition of culture and its function in modern society. The word culture comes from Latin words cultus, which means care. According to the definition given by Bhikhu Parekh, Chandra and Mahajan, 2007, 4, culture refers to a shared system of meaning in terms of which people understand themselves and the world and organize their individual and collective lives. It includes views about the nature of the self, its relations and the human life in general, moral values and ideals etc., and provides a framework, an intellectual and moral compass, in terms of which human beings navigate their way through their life. Laws, customs, religious beliefs, ritual and rites are important part of the cultural system of the society which influences human behavior. Culture has the following major functions: integrative, interpretative and identity. The integrative function refers to how a particular culture unites the members of the group. Common ideas, values, symbols and rituals bring about a commonness in the members which unites them. Sociologists point out that a certain degree of commonality is needed for social functioning and social continuity. The interpretative function of culture refers to framework that a value system provides to its members to interpret the world. The third function of culture refers to its role in giving identity to its members. Nationalisms, religions and languages are important artifacts of culture and are part of social identity of individuals. It is also important to note that these have been major causes of social conflict and social exclusion throughout human history. For example, in India the caste system is based on the principle of pollution and purity, which resulted in untouchability and violence against lower caste members in Indian society. General observations on present-day cultural situation. 1. All nation-states are now multicultural in composition. It is often observed that nations which claimed homogeneity, or what is popularly called one culture, was never really homogeneous in nature. These societies had significant minority populations which did not share the values of the mainstream culture. The response of majority was either to ignore, suppress minority cultures or to forcefully annihilate it. Kimlicker in IGNOU Montserrat and John Rex ed. 1997, 227-247. Social workers have addressed issues of racism and discrimination but have been influenced by the dominant culture also. 2. In the Western countries, migration has been an important factor in increasing the power and visibility of minority cultures. But the growth in immigrants has led to a number of major problems also. Firstly, the problem of integration of minority communities are unable to fit in modern cultures, which often leads to emergence of fundamentalism and terrorism. Second, many people of native community feel that immigrants are taking away their jobs, are responsible for economic problems, and are taking undue advantage of the welfare system of the country without significantly contributing to it. This sense of loss and injury is leading to revival of racism and xenophobia. Third, there is an increase in the suspicion and bitterness between different communities and between communities and the state. Vivirka, in IGNOU Montserrat and John Rex ed. 1997, 291-302. 3. In the developing world also there is an emergence of ethnic and religious assertion and militancy. According to sociologists, globalization has given rise to new anxieties and uncertainties which lead to hatred and violence between communities. Thus, globalization and localization seems to be two sides of the same coin. Singh in Ahmad, Ghosh and Rearfield, 2004. Neoliberal policies based on social Darwinism have contributed to increase in mass misery and ecological damage. Some of the tensions created by these policies are finding expression in the social conflicts occurring frequently around the world. Equally important is the gradual decline of the social welfare model which emerged after the Second World War in Europe and the United States. Anderson et al. 2005. 5. The world is also witnessing the emergence of new social movements which assert rights of different sections of society, women's movements, movements for rights of sexual minorities, environmental movements and cultural rights of indigenous people. Taylor, 1994, 38-39. Unlike past movements which aimed at securing economic benefits and increased political power, many of these movements aim at securing recognition for the individual's dignity and self-worth. 6. New forms of discrimination and violence based on identities are emerging which aim to curtail individual liberties and choices. The state is often complicit with the powerful groups that promoted these forms of discriminations. Religious and ethnic minorities are often victims of these processes. Women, 2002. 3.3 Response of professional social work to cultural issues. Social workers have always recognized the importance of cultural issues and the need to factor it in their practice. However, it is also true that social workers have been rightly criticized for their racism and snobbery. In the West, social workers who were mainly from white and middle-class backgrounds saw the causes of poverty as the laziness and the dissolute living habits of the poor. These social workers then attempted to reform them by forced education and discipline. Needless to say, many of these attempts were not only unsuccessful but had a negative impact on the disadvantaged sections. For example, the Young Men Christian Association, YMCA, an important voluntary organization working for the poor in Europe, gave importance to their character building, which meant promoting middle-class Christian values. Z. and Denton, 1963. In India too, the volunteers, philanthropists and professional social workers were mainly drawn from upper middle classes and middle class sections. Their value systems were influenced by combination of modern values that were promoted by the government and by their upper caste Hindu value system. The causes for the poor condition of the deprived communities and Dalit communities were identified as the lack of possessing proper culture and the lack of awareness. While it cannot be doubted that many social workers and social activists did honestly desire to improve the lives of the disadvantaged, their approach were greatly influenced by their paternalistic and condescending attitudes towards the poor. Even Mahatma Gandhi did not escape these Stereotypes. He urged student volunteers to give regular bath to the Harijan children and recite paragraphs from Hindu scriptures to improve their lives. Gandhi. 1999. 226 to 227. Social structures like the caste system and patriarchy, which were oppressive and exploitative, were ignored in this type of social analysis. It is only after the Dalit movements and women's movements developed a cultural critique of the social structures and dominant values that social workers too began to examine their own attitudes and approaches. Social workers have understood that cultural issues have to be analyzed effectively before any form of intervention is done. They have also realized that paternalistic and condescending approaches are not only ineffective but also damage the clients in long term. 3.4 Studying and understanding cultures. The culture of a particular community cannot be studied easily. It exists at two levels: the ideal culture and real culture. The ideal culture refers to what a particular community articulates to be its core values. It is revealed through its philosophies, literary works, and belief system, while the real culture is how members of the particular community actually behave. There can be significant differences in the two. For example, rivers are objects of worship in India, but they are among the most polluted in the world. All religions condemn killing of human beings, yet religions have been major sources of violence. These lapses cannot be explained simply by saying that people are hypocritical by nature. It has to be understood as people's behavior in a given situation. For example, Omen, 2008, in his study of religions and conflicts, concludes that religion in itself is not a source of violence, but when it is used by rulers for political purposes, it becomes a source of violence. Secondly, the study of culture of a particular community can be undertaken from a number of viewpoints. The insider's view, i.e., a member of the particular community, is different from the outsider's view of the same culture. The insider is able to experience many events which may not be possible for outsider. On the other hand, insider view may overlook many things which she takes as normal, which may be observed by the outsider. Many social workers experience the differences between their views on community life, the outsider view, and the community member's view, the insider view, of the same. For example, the practice of open defecation is normal and acceptable for the members of a community, while for the social workers it is a major cause for spreading diseases and pollution, and therefore, a serious social problem. Thirdly, individuals in society have multiple identities. They are members of many cultural communities at same time. Consequently, they are to be seen as having multiple social identities. Social workers have to take care that these complexities in social life are understood by them and dealt accordingly. For example, a social worker in Britain counseling as immigrant women from an Asian country belonging to minority religion have to understand that she is discriminated at different levels, as a woman in her own culture which values boys over girls, as member of minority living in place where mainstream culture is different, and as a member of race which is considered inferior to the white dominant race. Fourthly, the standards which are used to understand culture other than one's own can be a barrier to understanding that particular culture. When a particular culture is understood in its own terms, it is called a cultural relativistic view, whereas if a particular culture is judged using the viewer's own cultural standards, it is called an ethnocentric view. Social work values are based on modern values: equality, liberty, and social justice. Many clients may come from cultural groups which may have different value systems that advocate hierarchy and inequality, leading to differences in worldviews of the social workers and their clients. Fifthly, cultures by nature are dynamic and experience rapid changes. A cultural group may have subcultural groups which don't share all values of the larger group. Therefore, the response of members of these groups may be different from the responses of members of the larger group. Social worker will have to deal with members, groups, and community who may belong to different cultural groups. Needless to say, the members are influenced by, and are carriers of the cultures of their groups. Social workers have to be competent to deal with the members of different cultures while not neglecting social work core values. Healy, 2008, 241, explains using the picture below the dilemma of the social worker who has to take a position in relation to a client. As can be seen from the above discussion, developing the knowledge, skill and self-awareness to practice social work with clients from different cultural groups is not easy. There are no textbook solutions to the value conflict between the social workers and clients. Social workers will have to deal with the issue of culture depending on the situation and her training. Therefore, social work educators and practitioners have highlighted the importance of training for cultural competence at every level. 3.5 What is cultural competence? Social workers, like most people, are comfortable working with people who belong to one's own cultural group, often called people like us. But in his professional life he may have to interact with people whom he considers other. The other belongs to the group with different value systems, belief and norms. Cultural competence, then, is the ability to effectively work with clients who belong to different cultural groups. Important definitions of cultural competence. Green, as cited in Est. 2007, describes it as the ability to conduct professional work in a way that is consistent with the expectations which members of distinctive culture regard as appropriate among themselves. Cross, Bazron, Dennis, and Isaacs, as cited in Est. 2007, states that cultural competency embraces the importance of culture, the assessment of cross-cultural relations, vigilance towards the dynamics that result from cultural differences, the expansion of cultural knowledge and the adaptation of services to meet culturally unique needs. After reviewing the important definitions of cultural competence, Est. 2007 concludes that cultural competence refers to knowledge and information about various communities and their cultures, skills and empathy with diverse types of clients, and the ability to deal with different communities ethically and meaningfully. Ben Ari and Stryer ADRI, 2010, 2158, after reviewing important definitions of cultural competence, say that most of these have two basic assumptions. First, cultural competence is a necessary and sufficient condition for working effectively with differences. Second, cultural competence can be taught, learned, trained and attained. Developing cultural competence requires changes in the three dimensions of social work. Training and practice. 1. Knowledge about values, customs, beliefs and social structures of different communities are useful in social work practice. 2. Skills, communicating skills, skills to interpret body language of the clients, etc. 3. Attitudes, ability to assess oneself, cultural humility, etc. Given that cultural competence is considered an integral part of social work profession, it is highly desirable that the educational system for training social workers take into consideration these requirements for future training. Designing social work curriculums that respond to these situations are a major challenge for social work school and academicians. 3.6 Response of social work to cultural competence. The National Association of Social Workers, NASW, S Code of Ethics, 2008, stresses the need for developing cultural competence among social work professionals. https www.socialworkers.org/pub/code/code.asp. Developing further on the subject, a statement called Standards and Indicators for Cultural Competence was prepared, which described in detail the standards and method to be used. It mentions 10 standards needed for social workers: a. Ethics and values, b. Self-awareness, c. Cross-cultural knowledge, d. Cross-cultural skills, a. Service delivery, f. Empowerment and advocacy, g. Diverse workforce, h. Professional education, I. Language and communication, j. Leadership to advance cultural competence. https www.socialworkers.org/practice/standards/nasuculturalstandards.pdf. According to the document, cultural competence requires self-awareness, cultural humility and the commitment to understanding and embracing culture as central to effective practice. It further asks social workers to promote these values at different levels. It is not enough that should these standards guide their practice. It should be reflected in the functioning of the welfare organizations in which are employed. Social workers are also encouraged to promote and support policies that advance the values of diversity and pluralism. Professional social workers in India don't have a professional body and therefore the institutional response to multiculturalism cannot be traced historically. But as mentioned earlier, Indian social workers have moved away from the condescending and paternalistic approach to anti-oppressive approach and rights-based approach. The women movement, Dalit movements, tribal movements and sexual minorities movements have changed the perception of social workers who have recognized the importance of understanding the cultural issues of the people for whom they are working. These movements have challenged the hegemonic and homogenizing ideologies of the mainstream and asserted their own cultural identities and ideas. Social workers practicing in different areas need to understand the cultural dynamic in the communities they work and deal with it accordingly. Many of approaches used in India now do directly or indirectly recognize the need to understand cultural dynamics of the community. Some of the approaches are: A. Participatory approach emphasizes the importance of involving people in the decision-making process. The advantages of using the participatory approach has been to reduce the knowledge gap between the social workers and their clients, empower the clients and make them stakeholders in the process. Through the process, the social workers are better equipped to understand the socio-cultural situation of the clients and address it accordingly. B. Strengths approach stresses on the need for social workers to look at client systems not as weak and dependent but as being strong and resisting. In this approach, the social workers analyze the situation of the client group, their values, beliefs and religious faith of the individuals, groups and communities is an important component. By analyzing how these elements of culture support or damage the client's situation, the social worker is able to appreciate the client's situation and suggest realistic options to resolve their problems. C. Anti-oppressive approach assumes that it is not the weakness or incapacity of the clients that leads to problems at different levels but because of the structures that negatively impact the client. One of the key factors that contribute to adverse situation are cultural. It largely determines what client systems think and feel about the situation. D. Rights approach is based on the idea of universal human rights. According to this view, people have the natural and inherent right to life and liberty, basic standards of living and development. The rights approach has been increasingly adopted by social workers as it is based on globally recognized principles. However, one of the challenges in the using of this approach is that human rights are interpreted differently in different societies. Therefore, the social worker has to interpret human rights according to the socio-cultural values of the particular society. The process of adaptation of social work values to that of the client's situation is going on even in clinical settings in India. In a study conducted in Alcoholic the Addiction Center in Chennai, researchers point out that counselors modify social work methods according to their client. According to these social workers, the level of acceptance and practice effectiveness have improved as a result of strategic adaptation of social work methods. However, there is a need to coordinate the efforts to put cultural competence into the center of social work practice in India. According to the NASW, standards and indicators for cultural competence for social workers, demographic changes in American society necessitated that cultural issue be put in the center of social work practice. https www.socialworkers.org/practice/standards/nasuculturalstandards.pdf. The situation is similar in Australia, New Zealand, Canada and most countries of Europe where populations are becoming rapidly diverse. The Indian situation is quite different. India has always been a pluralistic society with a number of communities of different religions, castes, languages and races living side by side. India has diversity even at level of the village. Most Indian villages are divided into different parts in which different communities live and often their food habits, festivals and in some cases the spoken languages are different. That being the case, Indian social workers should have first to feel the need for professional cultural competence in dealing with diverse population. However, due to the influence of Eurocentric models adopted from the West, social workers from third world countries initially failed to give due importance to cultural issues, Midgley, 1990-296. More importantly, social workers in India were influenced by the modernization and nationalism paradigms which saw cultural differences as being gradually subsumed in the common mainstream culture. But social and political changes in India have forced social workers to change their views on cultural differences and give it adequate importance in professional service. 3.7 Educating for cultural competence. Social work has recognized the importance of cultural competence in its practice. Consequently, there is a need for imparting training to students to develop cultural competence. Developing cultural competence starts with the social worker, his professional self. According to the NASW Code of Ethics, cultural competence requires self-awareness, cultural humility, and the commitment to understanding and embracing culture is central to effective practice. https://www.socialworkers.org/practice/standards/nasuculturalstandards.pdf Social workers have to recognize that their knowledge, skill, organization resources and position in the organization gives them power over their client. They should be conscious about this fact and use it for the benefit of client. Social workers often unconsciously think that they are better than their clients and act accordingly. Social workers can also manipulate the professional situation and force the clients to adopt choice which they have chosen. Thus, social workers themselves need to get greater insight into their own behaviors and its impact on their clients. In the context of cultural competence, two terms are often used: cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity. Cultural awareness can be defined as the process of self-examination of one's own biases towards other cultures and the in-depth exploration of one's cultural and professional background. http://www.transculturalcare.net/cultural_competence_ model. HTM. Quoted in his opinion, cultural awareness is not enough and there is need for cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity is knowing that cultural differences as well as similarities exist, without assigning values, that is, better or worse, right or wrong, to those cultural differences. http://secip.air.org/cultural/q_howdifferent.html. National Maternal and Child Health. 1. Incorporating the importance of culture into the entire social work process of assessment, planning, intervention, evaluation, and termination. 2. Considering the dynamics that result from cultural difference and actively seeking relevant cultural knowledge and service adaptation to meet culture-specific needs of the client system. 3. Seeking to actively collaborate with indigenous social workers and helpers in delivering appropriate social work intervention. Some of the changes that have taken place to develop cultural competence are as follows. 1. Training programs for developing cultural competence. Training programs are to be included in the social work curriculum in schools and departments of social work throughout the world. Many of these schools and departments have already initiated the process and are using different models, which have been developed by academicians and practitioners. Social work agencies are also conducting training programs for developing competence for their staff members. An example of the aims of such a training program are: identify dominant cultural values and minority group values within a culture, which suggest both goals for practice and cross-cultural dissonance that will have to be managed. B. Identify cultural themes in helping and change. C. Identify culturally accepted processes of helping. D. Identify relative degrees of cultural stasis and change. And A. Use information in the above categories to develop hypotheses for practice with client systems. Garland and Escobar, 1988, 230. 2. Diverse workforce and classrooms. Diverse classrooms and workforce give members of different communities to interact with each other, build teams and function as a unit. Stereotypes and negative perceptions based on inadequate and misinformation are often removed with direct experiences with individuals from different communities. Mass, 2004, 5, 3. International educational exchange programs and overseas field placements. Students of social work are given opportunities to study a part of their academic Program in a foreign country. For example, a student from Europe can study a semester in India and vice versa. Students can also do their mandatory field placements in a foreign country. However, as of now, only students from developing countries are able to benefit from these programs as the financial costs of studying abroad is too high for most Indian students. Alphonse, 2008, 4. Use of modern communication to facilitate interaction between students, teachers, and practitioners of different countries. Social work organizations can facilitate mutual sharing of knowledge and experiences of social workers from different countries, which will lead to more knowledge and better understanding among social workers. 5. Internationalizing social work curriculum. Schools of social work are internationalizing their curriculum to include social work knowledge and experience from other countries. Academicians and practitioners are working to develop international social work theory which can be used in variety of situations with scope for modifications to adapt to local and specific conditions. Healy, 2008 and Cox and Pawar, 2006, 6. Social workers from non-European countries can develop social work intervention models which are based on their socio-cultural situation. These studies can contribute to the knowledge base of social work which is presently dominated by knowledge produced for Western societies and thereby make it more representative of global reality. 7. Social workers of every society have to articulate support for government policies which support diversity and pluralism and challenge those policies that are contrary to these values. 8. Social work educators and academics have developed models for implementing training programs for students which can be used to develop cultural competence. Most of these models consist of a number of sessions in which participants are given opportunities to develop self-awareness and understand their own biases regarding other cultural communities. Another important component is the knowledge of different communities which the social workers have worked, teaching different methods to interpreting the behavior patterns of different cultural groups is also included in the program. 3.8 Summary. The role of culture in social work has been recognized in social work practice throughout the world. The need for integrating cultural understanding as a distinct part of social work practice has been felt in organizations and schools of social work. However, understanding a culture of communities is not easy. It may not be fully possible to do so. Anthropologists study a community for many months before they can obtain reliable and valid knowledge about it. Social workers don't need that level of knowledge, but they would need the necessary knowledge which is needed to understand the client's situation, a degree of self-awareness and an understanding of one's own biases and preferences is the most important aspect of cultural competence. Human beings have a natural tendency to make assumptions about others which are not valid. In the practice of social work, the habit is a barrier to understanding the client's situation. Only constant self-examination and the periodic acquisition of knowledge about different communities can successfully address the problem. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.